Welcome to the Painting Coach, and today I am painting probably my favourite model from the Warhammer Quest Darkwater box, Drolf Ironhead, the Dwarf Ranger. There is lots of detail packed into a small space. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending me the box out early so I can make this content. Let's get painting. So I've primed the miniature in black using Chaos Black spray. I'm then going to base quite a bit of it using Dark Reaper. So this is going to be all of the overcoat, the sleeves and the legs on the model. Now, Dark Reaper doesn't necessarily cover particularly well, so I am going to use a couple of thin coats. The other thing I'm going to do here is base coat lots of colours before I do the first wash. Next, I'm going to base the sleeves and the trousers using Russ Grey, and because they're going over that Dark Reaper, it'll cover a lot easier. You will need 2, maybe 3 coats in some places, but just make sure it's nice and tidy and don't spill it onto any of the Dark Reaper. Then I'll do the weapon handles and the grips using Mephiston Red. These are probably going to be the brightest part of the model, and I'm just following the box art here, so you can get away with being a little bit messy at this stage. Then I'm going to move on to all the darker leather colour, and for this I'm using Dryad Bark to base it. Now, you can paint all your leather this colour if you want to. I just wanted to add a little bit of variation on there. So for this, we're just going to base things like the backpack, the gloves, and also those fold over parts that we've got on the model as well. So where the gloves fold over so you can see the inside, and similarly on the boots as well. Again, you can be fairly messy in some places, but do be careful around bits you've already got a base colour over. The last colour we'll add before a wash is all of the silver elements, and the colour reason for this is dark aluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour. Now, it seems that they've changed the recipe a little bit on this, so it does need a really good shake to cover well. If you haven't got this, something like Lead Belcher from Citadel is absolutely fine. Again, there's quite big areas such as the axe heads, but there are some quite intricate areas such as buckles and things like that. So just take your time painting these. Now that we've got all that done, it's time to put a little bit of a wash over the area, and the colour I'm using for this is Nuln Oil. And what I'm looking to do is basically cover everything I've already painted, but I don't want to slap this on, so I've got a really massive, ugly puddle. I want to take my time, I want to carefully apply this across all of the model, getting it into those recesses, those gaps between all the different elements as well. If you see it puddling really heavily one place, make sure you wick it away before it has a chance to dry. Once that's completely dry, it's time to go in and start highlighting. So we're going to start off with the silver, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Chrome from Vallejo Model Air. If you haven't got this, something like Runefang Steel will be absolutely fine. Generally, what I'm looking to do is drag my brush across some of the sharper edges, and this will give me a nice crisp highlight. For things like the axe blades, I'm actually painting the sharp elements. I'm painting all of them because they're going to catch the light and they really stand out on the tabletop. And at this scale and at this detail, we don't really necessarily need to worry too much about having some shading on there, and it just makes the process a little bit quicker. Again, be careful around elements you've already finished, and careful around bits that, particularly around some of those leather elements. Next up, we'll go back to Dark Reaper, and we're going to use this to highlight the areas of that. I'm not really sure what it is. It's kind of like an overcoat type thing. But generally, we're just going to leave the Nuln Oil in the recesses. We're going to paint the majority of this with the Dark Reaper, and this is going to give us that nice dark blue colour. So just work your way carefully across the model, being careful not to get this into any of the recesses. Next up, we'll start to highlight using Thunderhawk Blue. Now, again, I'm probably going to paint the majority of the areas of this with the Thunderhawk Blue, but I do want to make sure that where I've got crisp folds, I want nice crisp highlights. So make sure you've got a nice sharp tip on your brush. I'm using my Artist Opus Series S brushes here. If you want to get your own, use a link in the description and use my code TPC to get 5% off. I'll get a small kickback. There's no additional cost to you, though. And then I want to do a really fine highlight with some Russ Grey. Like I said, this is very fine and very sparingly. Once I've finished doing the really fine highlights, I'm also then going to highlight the sleeves and the trousers using the Russ Grey. Again, leaving the darker colour in the recesses, taking my time. There's not huge amounts to paint here, but it is important that we are tidy. Now, I then went slightly out of sequence, got excited and started highlighting the backpack and all the kind of the brown leather. Simply went back to Dryad Bark for this. And again, exactly the same thing we've done with everything. We left that darker colour in the recesses. We are painting quite a large area with the Dryad Bark here. And don't forget, you've got the gloves to do as well. I'm not worried so much about doing the folded parts on the gloves and the boots, but you can, of course, do them if you want. But we are going to paint them a much lighter colour later on. So if you do it, it'll just help you in terms of the coverage. I then went back to the trousers and the sleeves and just put a little bit of a highlight of Fenrisian Grey. And this really is focusing again on where you've got sharp and crisp folds just to help them pop and stand out a little bit. I then went back to all the leather and took some Gorthor Brown. And what I looked to do here is where I could is drag my brush across the sharp elements. But if I couldn't, then I was just very careful and just applied it across where I could see folds and crisp lines appearing. Now, again, doing this on the gloves as well, it can be challenging because they're quite small. So you don't want to blob on too much paint. So make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. And if you need to, you can always go back in with some Dryad Bark to correct it. The last highlight I did was a 50-50 mix of Karak Stone and the Gorthor Brown. And what I look to do this is paint it inside the Gorthor Brown from the previous stage. And that just gives me a nice crisp bright highlight that helps really sell the shape of the model. Now again, if you go on too thick or you make any mistakes, you can always repair it using some Gorthor Brown underneath. To highlight the red, I took some Mephiston Red and very carefully applied this to the weapon grips, making sure that I didn't paint it in the recesses, which are obviously going to be much, much darker. I then took some Wild Rider Red and I used this to put some nice thin highlights across the bottom, essentially right next to where the darkest elements are. Now this is a little bit of a jump in colour, but that's okay because they're really small, so you need something to give you the high contrast. I then finished this with a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright, making sure I kept this inside the Wild Rider Red from the previous stage. Next up, it was time to paint all of the rope detail. So we've got the rope that he's got hanging from his waist. We also have that rope or knot detail around his cloak and his hood. And we also have the fold-out parts showing the inside of the boots and the gloves. So the colour I used for this was Steel Legion Drab. Now the key here, again, as ever, is being really, really careful around the bits that you've already finished. There's quite a few at this point, so it is time to start really paying attention to what we're doing here. And you may need 2 coats just to get a good even coverage. I then washed all these areas using Agrax Earthshade. Now, it's really important that you don't throw this on, that you don't lump it on. I just put it on there and pulled it across into all the recesses. So it was kind of, I guess, yeah, it was a shade rather than a wash. So you just want a little bit in there. If you do put it on too heavy, make sure you put a dry brush into it so you suck it up and you don't let it pool. I then went in to highlight everything, and the first colour I used was Baneblade Brown. Now, I find Baneblade Brown to be a little bit of an awkward colour in terms of its coverage. I don't think it's great, and this is after it's been on my Vortex mixer as well, and I've given it a really good shake. So you will need 2 coats for this, but generally we're looking to paint over all those areas, just leaving the darker colours in the recesses. So again, really important that you've got a good point on your brush, not too much paint, and just work your way around the model, catching those edges where you can, but generally just lightening the areas in general. The last highlight we'll put on everything is Karak Stone. Now, the Karak Stone is one of my favourite colours, but it also gives a really nice earthy highlight to this. So what we're looking to do is paint it inside the Baneblade Brown from the previous step. And this is really going to start to brighten some of these elements on the model and will really, really help them stand out. For the rest of the leather on the model, I took some Rhinox hide and just based all of these areas. Now, in terms of what I've gone for the cover on the hatchet, I've gone for the kind of leather armor on the hips, and I've gone for the belt, and there's also a pouch on there. So there's lots of elements already finished now, so take your time here. You just want to get a nice even coverage across it all. Once that's dry, I'm going to use the Rhinox hide as kind of like the base and the shade layer. I'm then going to go in with some Doombull Brown and paint the majority of the leather, only leaving that Rhinox hide in the kind of recessed areas. And this is going to give me a nice reddy orange base coat. It looks a lot brighter when it's wet, but as it dries, it does blend in quite nicely. While I've got that Doombull Brown out, I'm also going to paint the beard as well. Next up, I'm going to take some Scrag Brown, and this is where I'm going to do my sharp highlight. I'm going to drag my brush across the leather as much as I can to get a nice fine line. I can also use this to put some nicks and scratches across the leather to show a little bit of wear and tear. And I am also going to use this on the beard a little bit as well. Next, we'll do the boots. Now, if you have spilt some paint on them, just base them with black, but you will have to base all of the boot with some black paint. I've used AK black. Use whatever black you've got. Then go in with some Eshin Grey and start to highlight. Now, again, you want to get this fairly crisp because it can look a little bit ugly if you're a little bit unwieldy with it. But the boots are very, very small elements, so just take your time. I'm then going to take a little bit of Dawnstone and paint this inside the Eshin Grey from the previous step. Now, it's very easy to put this on too thickly, and if you do, don't worry. You can correct it either with some Eshin Grey or with some of the black base coat. It's a really simple process, so don't be afraid to go back in and correct mistakes to get a crisper result. We'll do all of the gold next, and we're going to base this using Dragon's Gold from 2 thin coats. If you haven't got this, Retributor armor is absolutely fine. What I'm looking to do here is base everything. So I've got parts of the weapon. There's a little bit of a rune on his belt as well, which I did forget to do, but went back and did later on. Very, very important that you're careful, because obviously we have finished quite a lot of the model at this point, so just take your time. Before we shade that gold, I'm also going to paint the face. I'm going to use some Cadian flesh tone for this. Now, you may need 2 or 3 coats to cover over the black, but that's fine. Just make sure you don't obscure any detail by putting it on too thickly. If you spill it on the beard, that's absolutely fine. I'm then going to shade the gold and the face using Reikland Flesh Shade. So again, as we've done with all the shading on this model, we don't want to flood any of the areas. We just want to tint the surface and make sure it flows into the recesses. Once everything is completely dry, take some glistening gold, or if you haven't got this, take some Liberator Gold from Citadel. And what I'm looking to do is highlight the gold in a very similar way to I've done all the silver. So I'm looking to drag my brush across the edges to get nice crisp highlights. For some parts of it, particularly bits facing upwards, then just covering the whole area will work as well, because again, it just adds to the brightness and the readability of the model. Now, I also painted elements of the crossbow and the crossbow bolts with gold as well, again, just to give me a different colour and to help them stand out on the back of the model. To highlight the face, go back to Cadian Flesh Tone and just very carefully apply this across the model, leaving the Reikland Flesh Shade in all of the recesses. Now, this can be a little bit awkward, particularly when you're trying to get it into the cheekbones, but again, just take your time. You can see I've got hardly any paint on my brush. Next up, we'll take a little bit of Kislev Flesh, and I'm going to use this just to highlight inside the Cadian Flesh Tone from the previous step. This is nice and easy. It's just important that you take your time. For the beard, for some reason, Drolf Ironhead has a 2-tone beard. So what I'm going to do is paint the moustache and that Van Dyke bit a little bit with black paint. Now, I'm using AK Black for this. Use whatever black that you want. I'm then going to highlight it first with some Dryad Bark, so you're going to get a really, really kind of dark brown, and then I'm going to take some Gorthor Brown and highlight this up. For the red parts of the beard, I'm going to use some Scrag Brown just to accentuate a lot of the beard strands and really kind of lock in. It's more of a reddy ginger colour. And then to finish off, I'm going to take a little bit of Jacaro Orange just as a really fine highlight. Now, this is a little bit of a desaturated colour, but it does work quite nicely for this. But like I said, use it sparingly and a good tip on your brush. And there we have it. Drolf Ironhead is done and ready for the tabletop. Like I said, it was my favourite model from the box at the start, and now I've painted it. It is still my favourite model. I really, really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, leave it a like and a comment down below. Let me know which other models you want to see me do, and you can check out my first tutorial on Edmark right here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.